Today's reading comes from 1 Samuel 17, 57 through 18, 4, and 20, 12 to 17. As soon as David returned from killing Goliath, Abner took him and brought him before Saul, with David still holding the Philistine's head. "Whose son are you, young man?" Saul asked him. David said, "I am the son of your servant, Jesse of Bethlehem." After David had finished talking with Saul, Jonathan became one in spirit with David, and he loved him as himself. From that day, Saul kept David with him and did not let him return home to his family. And Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Jonathan took off the robe he was wearing and gave it to David, along with his tunic, and even his sword, his bow, and his belt. Then Jonathan said to David, "I swear by the Lord, the God of Israel, that I will surely sound out my father by this time, the day after tomorrow. If he is favorably disposed toward you, will I not send you word and let you know? But if my father intends to harm you, may the Lord deal with Jonathan, be it ever so severely, if I do not let you know and send you away in peace. May the Lord be with you as he has been with my father. But show me unfailing kindness like the Lord's kindness, as long as I live, so that I may not be killed, and do not ever cut off your kindness from my family, not even when the Lord has cut off every one of David's enemies from the face of the earth." So Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, "May the Lord call David's enemies to account." And Jonathan had David reaffirm his oath out of love for him, because he loved him as he loved himself. The word of the Lord.
You may be seated. Well, hey, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Walt. I'm one of the pastors here at Hope. It is great to be with you. Curious, show of hands, how many of you moved to New York from somewhere else? We got a few transplants. All right. For how many of you was this like your first major move in life? Show of hands. A few more, a little bit less, but a few more. Yeah, for real, right? So my family moved here from Boston, where we had lived for 15 years. But our first major move was when we moved to Boston from Maryland. It was a massive transition for us. We had lived, my wife and I had lived in Maryland our entire lives. We grew up there. We were born there, grew up there, went to college there. We got married there. Pretty much everything that we knew and we loved was in the old line state. And that included our friends. We had an amazing group of friends down there, rich histories, countless hours spent together. Leaving them behind was going to be tough, but the time had come for a change, and we were up for it. We were excited to make some new people, and we were rolling up to Boston like, "Hey, you know what? Like we're extroverts. We're social people. Jen, you make great conversation. I'll just kind of put out the vibe. Like we're gonna make some friends. It's gonna be great." And after our first few years in Boston, we made tons of great connections. We were in some fantastic small groups. We had people over for dinner. We went to parties. We went to hangouts, and we were making friends, not just surface level acquaintances, but we were going deep with these people, sharing about our lives, sharing about our struggles in marriage or with our careers. We were sharing about our hopes for the future. It was good stuff. But then the strangest thing started to happen. People started moving away. And one by one, or couple by couple, these friends started leaving. And initially, I thought it was just going to be a few goodbyes, right? Life happens. I get it. But one night, I was watching a comedy called I Love You, Man, starring Saul Rudd. It's about a guy who is engaged, but he didn't actually have any guy friends to be a best man. And so the whole movie is him going on a hunt just trying to make a single male friend who can be his best man at his wedding. And I was watching this movie, and it's a comedy, right? It's supposed to be funny. But I'm feeling so sad. Like, what is going on? And then it dawned on me, I was like, oh, like I'm this guy. I have no friends. My life is sad. And after years of putting work into real friendships, I just looked around and I was like, I am all alone here. I'm all alone. All the guys I'd gotten close to had moved away. They graduated from school, they took a job somewhere else, they went to be closer to their family or live someplace more affordable, right? All good reasons. But I just wasn't expecting the revolving door to be spinning that quickly. And I can imagine that many of you have experienced a similar dynamic here in New York. And that began to have an effect on me. I just got tired of always having to kickstart new friendships. Growing close to people requires work, good and important work, but when you're doing it all the time, it just gets exhausting. I became less and less willing to trust people with the more vulnerable parts of my life because I knew they were going to bounce in just a little while anyway. And it's hard to share those vulnerable parts, right? It feels vulnerable and uncomfortable. And if I was going to do that, I wanted it to, pay off. And I knew that it wasn't going to. It wasn't going to be worth it. One day, a leader in our church and I were having coffee, and I'd known him for a while at this point. And at one moment in the conversation, he looked at me and said, "Walt, I just feel like you're really hard to know." And that really surprised me. It took me aback because for my entire life, I had thought of myself as someone who wanted to be known, who was eager to get to know people, eager for friendship. But something in me was changing, and I realized I was becoming something I had always feared, a cold New Englander. Maybe you have also felt fatigued by the constant relational turnover in New York or other fast-paced cities in which you've lived. It's just not worth the effort. Maybe you're just grinding. Now's the time of life to make some real strides in your career. You don't have any time or interest in cultivating friendships. They're just not a priority right now. Or maybe you've gotten past that transient early career stage and you're beginning to settle down into your work or into family life, but you feel pulled in so many different directions that you just don't have time for it. There's not a margin to cultivate friendships. Maybe you're afraid that if you let people in on what's really going on in your life, your fears, your struggles, your painful past, then they're going to make things worse by walking out or by turning on you. Recently, I watched this obscure animated film. I don't know if anyone else here has seen it. It's called K-Pop Demon Hunters. I don't know if you guys have seen this one at all. One of the major themes of this movie was around hiding places of shame in our lives from the people who are supposed to know us the most. Maybe there are some patterns, so to speak, in our lives that we don't want other people to know about. Wherever we are in life, we will always find reasons to keep people at a distance or prioritize our own desires over meaningful relationships. And to be fair, that tendency to look out for myself first existed in me long before I moved to Boston. I remember a time in high school, I stole my best friend's girl because I was like, hey, high school girlfriends are going to last forever, but best friends are going to come and go, right? Hey, props to all the high school sweethearts out there. How often will we choose something for our own benefit rather than the benefit of a friend? A lot of times it's just easier for me to choose me. And eventually I felt like I had arrived at this place of equilibrium. I had friends, I had people I enjoyed being around, but we weren't all that deep. There were a handful of people that I did entrust the more vulnerable parts of my life to, but we didn't really see each other all that much. We were busy, we had things going on. So my friendship situation wasn't terrible, but it wasn't great either. It was okay. It was working, sort of. And I wonder for how many of you that feels like your situation as well. Our culture is not prioritizing relationships and friendships the way that we once were. Third places and third spaces where those connections are made are rapidly disappearing. Starbucks built its brand on creating community around coffee, and yet just a week or so ago, a few dozen places around the city closed. I just got back from a trip to London where I heard that pubs are closing at a rate of 1 per day. Weekly religious service attendance has fallen from 42% to 30% in the past 2 decades, and 75% of restaurant orders are not eaten in the restaurant. It's just easier to spend more time alone, whether we're scrolling or gaming or streaming or working. It's estimated that the amount of time that kids spend playing together has been cut in half since the beginning of the 2000s. And at the same time, our anxiety has skyrocketed. We're increasingly polarized, suspicious of people who are different than us, and our sense of purpose and meaning has become confused and diluted. According to the World Health Organization, loneliness plays a part in 100 deaths per hour. Our inability to develop and maintain meaningful relationships and friendships is literally killing us. But it doesn't have to be that way. We might feel stuck in shallow relationships or even wonder why they matter in the first place, but the Christian story can offer us a vision and a way to move forward that is far richer and far more meaningful than we could have hoped. And today's passage is one of my favorites on the topic of friendship because it displays an experience of friendship that is so radically different from what's common today that honestly, when I read it, it makes me feel a little uncomfortable. And maybe when you heard the story being read, it made you feel a little uncomfortable, but I think that's a good thing. Our story centers around two young men, David and Jonathan. If you're familiar with the story of David in the Bible, you'll know that he goes on to become the greatest king in the history of Israel and an ancestor of Jesus. But his journey to the throne was very unusual, full of twists and turns. He had humble beginnings. He started out as a shepherd boy, a nobody, until God intervened. It was actually Jonathan who was next in line for the crown. Jonathan was the son of King Saul and the rightful heir to the kingdom, but all that changed. Saul was on his way out the door. He was simply unfit to rule, and a whole other sermon could be preached about how his lack of connection with God negatively affected his leadership. God had chosen a new king, a man after God's own heart, and that was David. David skyrocketed to popularity by defeating the giant Philistine Goliath when no one else could. And in that moment, Saul had David stay with him at the palace, which is where he met Jonathan. And something changed in Jonathan as all of this transpired. He knew that things were not going well with his father, but you kind of have to think he just assumed that he would be the next in line, right? He was the prince, after all. But rather than double down on what he saw as his birthright, he chose a drastically different path. We don't get a whole lot of clues or insight into what exactly happened, but we see this incredible bond of love form between these two men. We read that Jonathan became one in spirit and loved him as he loved himself. And many years later, when Jonathan was killed in battle, David was grief-stricken. He lamented, "I am distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. Greatly beloved were you to me." There is more to this love than deep affection, though. It was expressed in profound and compelling ways that might be difficult for us to fully grasp. And we see that at one significant moment, Jonathan took off the robe he was wearing and gave it to David, along with his tunic and even his sword, his bow, and his belt. Now, some of you might be thinking, this is exactly why I don't go out anymore. It's weird out there. Like, what is going on? What is happening? This is kind of awkward. We might even read this and think like, okay, maybe there's some kind of like sexual relationship happening here. And I could understand why we might wonder that. But a closer look would show us that that's not the dynamic that's happening here. It's not a sexual relationship. It's actually a profoundly sacrificial relationship. In the ancient Near East, your clothing meant something. Now, obviously, we all like to look sharp these days, but back then, they took it to a whole new level. Robes weren't just status symbols, they were status themselves. Robes, like the one Jonathan was wearing, acted as a wallet and a safety deposit box all in one. They came with these long tassels, and into these tassels were sewn money, rights to land and property, and other valuables. Robes were how inheritance was passed down from one generation to the next. And we see their prominence elsewhere in the Bible. The big deal about Joseph's coat, for those of you familiar with the story or the musical, wasn't that it was super fancy with lots of colors and his brothers just got jealous because he looked so fine, right? The big deal was that it represented family wealth. Joseph's brother loved him so much that he gave him a massive inheritance, even though he was way down the line, which is why his brothers wanted to kill him. And in the parable of the prodigal son, the famous one that Jesus taught, when the son returns home, the father rushes out of the house and puts a robe around him. This wasn't because he was cold. It was his act of re-inheriting him back into the family, despite the fact that he had wandered away and squandered all of his previous inheritance. It demonstrated the radical, generous, extravagant love of God. So Jonathan's robe was legit. Remember, he was the son of Saul, the prince of the entire kingdom. And it's likely that for his entire life, he had been groomed to one day be the king. He had been told time and again that the throne would be his. So you can imagine that every single morning, he is putting on his robe and reminded that one day, this kingdom is going to be mine. And yet, he recognizes that God is doing something different. God is moving in David's life. God is moving in Jonathan's life. And unlike his father, who would try to kill David several times over to prevent him from becoming king, Jonathan recognizes God's dreams for David. He recognized that David, not he, would one day become king. And so he literally lays it all down. His status, his inheritance, his claim to the kingdom, he lays it down at David's feet. If you've been around Hope for even just a little bit, you would have heard us underscore the call to self-sacrifice. That instead of becoming people who constantly prioritize our career, our accolades, our agendas, that we can be different. We can be a people shaped by the sacrificial love of Jesus. Why do we keep on banging that drum? It's because we believe Jesus' words when he said that for those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who want to lose their life for my sake will find it. We believe that it is in losing our lives for Jesus' sake and for loving one others in the name of Jesus. That's what will bring us a full, joyful, and abundant life. And yet there are so many things in our world that will pull us in the other direction. You know, I'm like, I want to save my life by saving it, right? And as I shared earlier, I got tired of people I loved moving away. I got tired of continually putting in the hard work that real friendships require because it just became easier to keep things casual and focus on myself. And in those seasons where self-centeredness and self-protectiveness won out, it felt a little bit like I was saving my life at first. Like, this is just how to live in an environment that's so transient and so hard. But ultimately, I was not better off for it. Eventually, it would catch up to me. The isolation, the lack of real joy in community, missing the significance of being known by people I love and I trust, not being challenged to grow, not having opportunities to serve. They didn't make for a better, more whole life. It made for a fairly cold one. Some would argue that the only deep relationships we're supposed to have are with our spouses or with immediate family members. But that's clearly not what the scriptures teach or what God has in mind. The picture of spiritual friendship that we see in Jonathan and David and elsewhere in stories like Ruth and Naomi's and members of the early church is radically different than what we often settle for. It's radical sacrifice that leads to radical life and radical joy. It's hard to overstate what Jonathan gave up for David. He set aside his comforts and privileges. He went against the will of his father, and his future is probably a lot less clear than it was before he met David. But Jonathan saw what God was doing in David's life, and he saw what God was doing in his own life. For a long time, he had probably dreamed of having a big part to play in the story of God and the story of God's people. But he was beginning to realize that this part was going to be different. And yet, it was still going to be incredibly significant. Because David would not have become king were it not for Jonathan. Jonathan warned David of Saul's plans to kill him and helped him escape numerous times. When Saul caught on, he tried to kill Jonathan as well, but Jonathan kept persisting in his relationship with David because this friendship was not disposable or shallow. It was based on committed love. And we read today, we heard that Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David. And Jonathan had David reaffirm his oath out of love for him because he loved him as himself. Several times throughout their story, Jonathan and David would affirm their love for one another through a covenant. A covenant is a formal commitment between two parties before God. It's a promise to lifelong loyalty and service and care no matter what. And today, we see it happen almost exclusively in marriages. But back in the ancient Near East, that wasn't the case at all. These were actually fairly common in a variety of contexts, from nations making peace with one another to individuals like Jonathan and David. And some have called this practice spiritual friendship. Bonds that aren't marital or familial, but go a lot deeper than just rooting for the same sports team or finding a cool place to go out to dinner on the weekend. It's a kind of commitment that's pretty alien in our world. Our commitments are more seasonal, whereas here, Jonathan and David have promised one another lifelong love, as well as for their families. After Jonathan died and David became king, David asked, "Is anyone still left of the house of Saul to whom I can show kindness for Jonathan's sake?" He found Jonathan's son, who is lame and an outcast, and David brought him into the palace, gave him land, had him eat at his own table for the rest of his life. Jonathan sacrificed much, but he and his family gained so much more. So what does this look like? Am I suggesting that we go on from here and we just start making covenants with everybody that we're friends with on Facebook or social media or whatever? Like, no, that's probably a bad idea. I would not advise that. But I think we should be considering ways that our friendships could be taking steps towards greater depth, value, and love. One of my older single friends once shared with me honestly about the fears she has about growing old and alone. And I grieve that. If our church is holding up this higher standard of friendship, then that concern should be greatly diminished, if not wiped out altogether. We can become more. So how do we do that? I think the first step that we should all take is to honestly look in the mirror and ask ourselves, would I be my friend? Would I be my friend? Am I the kind of person that I would want to be friends with? Am I the kind of person that makes relationships all about themselves? Right? I'm talking all the time. I'm quick to flake or cancel plans. I ask for help, but I never give it. I'm obsessed with my work, and so on and so on. Or do I genuinely care? Do I show up? Do I ask thoughtful questions? Do I offer encouragement? Do I pray for my friends? Do I seek to serve them? As the saying goes, the best way to make a friend is to be a friend. Being a friend might entail developing some muscles that have atrophied. It's likely that a lot of us are caught up in frictionless relationships with things like porn or AI or social media influencers. Pseudo relationships that will never actually ask anything of us but give the impression of intimacy. And if that's where we find ourselves, then we have got to let those go because they are killing our capacity for real relationship and real connection. Is it easier to feel connected to a screen? Yeah, maybe, at least initially and at first, because real friendships, real relationships are hard. People are hard. We've got issues and we struggle and we get under people's skin and get on their nerves. But in the Christian story, we believe that people are made in the image of God. And what that means is that when we encounter one another, we experience something of God, because God is a God of relationship. And it is actually in drawing nearer to one another that we draw near to God as well. The Apostle Paul taught the early followers of Jesus about life that is filled with the Holy Spirit, filled with the goodness and love of God. And he wrote this now famous line: the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Many of us, if not all of us, would say that we would like more of those things. That's a pretty great list, right? We would like to be more kind. We would like to be more loving. We would like to be more patient. But here's the catch. We are only going to develop those kind of muscles by being in relationships that will test our ability to love, our ability to be patient, our ability to be kind, right? We need the friction of friendship to help us become who God wants us to be. Back in Boston, I realized I needed to make some changes. I couldn't just settle for shallow relationships and feel like I was just the victim of a transient city. I realized I needed some anchors. I needed to find some people who were in a similar stage of life than me, who I knew would be around for a while. And so I identified some guys who weren't going anywhere, and I made it a point to get time with them. This wasn't easy or natural or organic, right? It was intentional. And honestly, it felt costly at times. It took extra energy to initiate. It took away from the me time that I'd become so used to. And we were actually pretty different from one another. Different backgrounds, different ethnicities, different personalities. There was a lot that I admired about them. Their faith and their character. That was why I wanted time with them in the first place. But it took work and effort to really get to know one another. We got into a pattern of hanging out maybe once a month. And then over time, after several months this kind of accrued, we began really connecting, really getting close with one another. And part of what made those relationships so significant was that, like David and Jonathan, we were learning who God made us to be and who God made the other to be. Learning each other's stories, our passions, our struggles. Inviting feedback and challenge, offering affirmation and support. And I'm so grateful for how God used them to challenge me, to help me grow, to help me become more of who God created me to be. And I'm grateful for the part that I was able to play in their story as well. So what are some things that you can sacrifice in order to be a better friend in this season? If you feel like you're starting from zero, maybe you moved to the city yesterday. All right, maybe you're looking around, you feel like everybody you've known and loved has left you. Maybe you've just been hunkered down at work or, in gaming or whatever, and you're just like, okay, I'm starting from scratch. I need some friends, right? If that's you, it's okay. There's hope. All right, my encouragement is to simply start showing up. Just start showing up. Come to our rooftop/third floor party. Come to the church retreat. All right, go to the places where people are, right? Come to our events, come to our courses, join a service team. Just be consistent somewhere. And then start being the kind of person that you would want to befriend. If you have friends, or if you're in a small group, then it might be time to honestly ask, what does your commitment to that group really look like? Are you investing in these friendships week in and week out? Are you checking in with folks? Are you asking them how they're doing? Are you praying for them regularly? Or is your small group just a placeholder on your calendar until something better pops up? You're not going to develop real spiritual relationships by just dropping in and hanging out once a month and then saying, great, I'll see you in a couple weeks, right? That's not going to work, right? It might be time to really commit, to really leaning in this season. To say that I'm going to make this group of people a commitment. I'm going to make them a priority. I'm going to be intentional. I'm going to be eager to listen. I'm going to share about what's going on in my life. I'm going to follow up with people, right? Don't just coast. Don't just skate by. We need one another. And perhaps God is inviting you to the truly countercultural move of staying in New York for the long term. Instead of pursuing that career or that promotion or that nice retirement life somewhere else. Jonathan gave up an entire kingdom for his friend. What would it communicate to your friends here if you chose to stay out of love for them? Friendships take time to nurture and to develop, so we shouldn't be so quick to leave them behind because we can make a little bit more money or have a slightly nicer title somewhere else. Right? Our culture values success, finances, and comfort over friendship, but we can show our culture a picture of the gospel by flipping that all around. Because this is the picture that Jesus gives us. Jonathan gave us this beautiful and compelling image of spiritual friendship, and yet Jesus takes it to the next level. Jonathan was a prince who befriended a shepherd boy, a total nobody, and laid down his right to the kingdom for David's sake. But in Jesus, God crosses time and space, putting aside splendor and glory to draw near to us. People who are messed up, have made mistakes. People who are selfish and adrift and lost. Jesus comes near so that we could be a part of his family, his kingdom. Jonathan risked his life for David. He was willing to die for him if that's what it took. But Jesus knew that the only way for us to be free from sin and shame and death was for him to die first. For him to enter into death and to pull us out to life on the other side. He had to die in order for us to live. And so that's what he did. And he taught his followers, greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. And he did it. Jonathan befriended David and united himself to David through a covenant. Yet in Jesus, God looks at, the God of all creation looks at us and says, I have called you friends. And he grabs hold of us and refuses to let us go. How many of us yearn for friendship? How many of us yearn to be known? How many of us feel tired of being alone? Tired of feeling disconnected, tired of these frictionless friendships that seem to cost nothing and yet end up taking everything? How many of us feel surrounded by people, even people we really enjoy being around, and yet we still feel completely unknown because none of them really know what's going on? I'm constantly surprised by how easy it is to be surrounded by people and yet still feel completely alone. Jesus is the solution to the loneliness epidemic that so many of us feel stuck in. He's real, and he is close, and he isn't going anywhere. The best way to be a good friend to someone is to start by letting Jesus be a good friend to you. To ask him to fill you with his love. To make tangible his presence. To heal you of your shame. And to fill you with his spirit so that you could be the kind of friend that this city desperately needs. Someone who isn't just using relationships as disposable commodities, but as someone who seeks to be an agent of blessing and light and hope. This is the kind of friendship that Jesus wants you to be, but first and foremost, this is the kind of friend that Jesus wants to be for you.